Salve omnes, welcome to this video lesson on chapter 11. We're looking at accusative infinitive construction. So essentially in Latin, Latin likes to use accusative infinitive in some places where English would not. For example, we say, for instance, the teacher says that the boys are winning. But Latin is going to say something like the teacher says the boy is to be winning. Okay? So in cases where we would say I see or say or hear that something is the case, Latin will say you see, hear, or whatever, a thing to be the case. Okay? And the thing, the subject of the infinitive, is going to be accusative, and then the verb in that clause is going to be the infinitive. So let's look at some examples. So for each whole number in these examples, that's just a normal sentence, and then we're going to see how that sentence turns into an accusative infinitive construction in the A and B examples. So, number one, puellam pueri vident. The boys, pueri, nominative plural, see the girl. Now that's just a normal Latin sentence. But let's say I want to say that the book says that the boys see the girl. So that's the 1A. The book says, liber dicit. And then in English we say that the boys see the girl. But in Latin you say pueros, accusative, and then you say the verb as videre, an infinitive, and then you would still have the normal direct object as we had in the main sentence, number one. You just keep the puellam from there. So again, if I look at this, it literally means something like the book says the boys to see the girl. But we don't say it that way in English, so we have to understand the accusative infinitive construction is in Latin, but we don't use that in English. So what has changed from 1 to 1A? Well, of course, we've got the introductory clause, liber dicit, the book says, but then we're changing the pueri into pueros, and we're changing the main verb vident into videre. Those are the things that change in this accusative infinitive construction. And again, it's so called that because pueros is accusative, that's the subject of the infinitive, and then the verb becomes an infinitive. So vident, a normal indicative verb, becomes videre, an infinitive verb. Let's look at number 2. Example 2, mater filios amat, the mother loves her sons. Now that's a normal Latin sentence. But let's say we want to say the father sees that the mother loves her sons. Well, pater vidit, the father sees. But then what happens to the clause in number 2? Well, in 2a, mater becomes matrem. Filios stays the same again. It's just the regular object of that verb. But then the verb itself, amat, which was originally a main verb, loves, now becomes an infinitive, amare. So literally again, what the Latin is saying is the father sees the mother to love the sons. Now that sounds ridiculous in English, so again you have to recognize the difference between Latin, where you do use accusative infinitive, and English, where you say the father sees the mother loves the sons, or that the mother loves the sons. It's often clearer if we throw the that in, but most of the time we leave it out when we're just speaking quickly in English. So the father sees that the mother loves the sons. In Latin, looks more like the mother to love the sons. Okay, number 3. Here we're going to have 2 examples just to show you how sometimes the English will seem a little bit more like the Latin, sometimes further away. So the base sentence again, they're just regular Latin sentence, pater Marcum verberat, 3, the father whips Marcus, okay? So pater is our subject, Marcum is the direct object, verberat is just a normal Latin verb. Now we can turn that into 3a, and this is going to be basically Aemilia tells the father to whip Marcus, right? Or orders the father to whip Marcus. So Aemilia you bet, Aemilia orders. And then notice this one looks pretty much like you would expect it to from English. We have patrem, the father, and then verberare, the infinitive, to whip. and then Marcum accusative. So in other words, when we say Aemilia orders the father to whip Marcus, we're using basically the same structure, maybe different word order than the Latin, but verberare is an infinitive. In English, we have to whip as an infinitive. So basically, things are functioning the same way. But 3b is going to be different. Servi vident, the slaves see. So here we want to say the slaves see that the father is whipping Marcus, right? But in Latin, you say patrem Marcum verberare being an infinitive. So if we translate 3b literally, it means the slaves see the father to whip Marcus. But again, we don't say that in English. We will do that with a that clause, or maybe even drop the that out. It's going to be the slaves see that the father whips Marcus, or is whipping Marcus, or we could just say the slaves see the father is whipping Marcus. Number 4, the base sentence again, Ancilla atrium intrat, the slave woman enters the atrium. Now in 4a, we want to change that into the mistress orders the slave woman to enter the atrium. Notice again here, since we're using this word for orders or tells someone to do something, you bet, we can just have the infinitive in English and in Latin, right? We say the mistress orders the slave woman to enter the atrium. Latin likewise uses intrare, to enter. That's the infinitive. But in 4b, notice again when we switch to a different verb, it doesn't sound the same in English and in Latin. We say the boys see that the slave woman is entering the atrium, but Latin literally is saying something more like the boys see the slave woman to enter the atrium, because intrare, again, is an infinitive. So again, the distinction to make on the 4b is that the literal translation is the boys see the slave woman to enter the atrium, but you may not translate it that way. You need to say the boys see that the slave woman enters the atrium, because that's how we say it in English. Okay, 5, the main verb example, puella et purri in horto sunt. Sunt is a main verb there. The girl and the boys are in the garden. That's a normal, straightforward Latin sentence. Okay, in 5a, we get vident. So mater et pater vident, the mother and father see. And we would say, see that the girl and boys are in the garden. But notice that Latin again uses an accusative, puellum, pueros, both of those are accusative, and the infinitive, esse. So it literally says the mother and father see the girl and boys to be in the garden. You may not translate it that way, though. You really need to change it over to make it make sense in English. So the mother and father see that the girl and the boys are in the garden. 5b, to show you another type of construction you can get with accusative infinitive, necesse est means it's necessary. Okay? So in English we can say it's necessary that you leave. Okay, so we can do that with a that clause. We can also say it's necessary for somebody to do something. And that's a little bit more like what we see here in the Latin. Necesse est, it's necessary that the girl and boy be in the garden, or again, this sounds a little closer to what's actually happening in the Latin. It's necessary for the girl and the boy to be in the garden. Or actually, I should say boys. So let me just change that. Instead of puerum, it should be pueros, right? To keep it parallel to the sentence up above. It's necessary for the girl and the boys to be in the garden. All right, well, that concludes this little video lesson on accusative infinitive construction. Hopefully you can see the relationship between just a normal straightforward Latin sentence and then what happens to it when we put that into the accusative infinitive construction inside of a larger complex sentence. Valete omnes.